God says, have no other gods before me. The Mosaic law is built upon the 10 Commandments, and the law was built upon the first commandment, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Deuteronomy 5 and 6. Here we see not only God's prohibition against idolatry, but his reasons for that prohibition. It was the Lord God who had the power to bring his people out of bondage in Egypt. He alone cared enough for them to choose them to be his own, and he alone delivered and protected them. For all this, he declares that he alone deserves to be worshipped and reverenced. No idol made of wood or stone is God. Idols are deaf, dumb, blind, and powerless. Isaiah 44 and 18. Paul's letter to the Romans indicates the worship of things in creation themselves, not just their images, is wrong in the eyes of God in Romans 1:25. Paul also warns the Colossians against worshiping other supernatural beings. Do not let anyone who delights in false humility and the worship of angels disqualify you for the prize in Colossians 2 and 18. Jesus expanded the definition of other gods to include concepts in addition to images, living things, and other supernatural beings. In Matthew 6 and 24, he warns against the worship of material things. No one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Greek word mammon, as translated here as money, does not mean the money in one's pockets. It is the personification of wealth or money, especially wealth gained through greediness. The love of which in modern terminology is materialism. The dangers of worshiping material things are clearly outlined in the story of the rich young ruler from Matthew chapter 19 verses 16 through 26, who turned away from Christ because he could not part from his wealth. And even though he was set apart from God, for God as a Nazarite, and we're talking about Samson, worship other gods, that Samson's God was himself of his pride and self-worship led to his downfall. He was so confident in his own abilities that he believed he no longer needed God. And in the end, despite being beaten, blinded, and humiliated, Samson neither repented nor learned that his way was not God's way. He was more concerned with revenge and his eyesight than with God's plan for his chosen people. He served himself and his priorities, making them his idols. Those who worship other gods will ultimately face the same fate as the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel, where they were challenged by Elijah the prophet to a duel. Elijah and the prophets of Baal offered sacrifices to their respective deities, but they did not burn the sacrifices. The God who responded to their entreaties and took their sacrifice would be declared the one true God for all Israel. The prophets of Baal started early and prayed and pleaded with Baal to burn their sacrifice. Meanwhile, Elijah taunted them, "Shout louder, surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought or busy or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened." In 1 Kings chapter 18 verse 27. In the end, the prophets of Baal were all killed by the Israelites after the one true God demonstrated his power, burning up the offering, the water, the wood, the stones, and the soil at the altar. Our God is never busy, asleep, traveling, or distracted. And Paul describes the sovereignty of God. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and does not live in temples built by hands, and he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill, in Acts 17:24 and 25. God commands us not to serve other gods because there are no other gods except the ones we make ourselves. And David describes what awaits the person who puts God ahead of all else. Blessed is the man who makes the Lord his trust, who does not look to the proud, to those who turn aside to false gods. In Psalms 44, chapter 4, verse 4. Chapter 40, verse 4.